Hello, this tutorial will focus on the Blender to Rhino workflow for creation of 3D OSM layers as well as texture topomap. Blender is an open source 3D creation software that supports quite a lot of extensive workflow for modeling, rigging animation, simulation, and recently GIS. Let's get started by downloading Blender. I'm going to go to the download tab here and click download. So wait for your download to complete and execute the MSI file. So after downloading process is completed, open your Blender application, and the interface looks quite similar to other 3D modeling programs. This is your welcome node. Just click out of it, and you will see an environment already ready with a camera, with the cube geometry and a light. So you will see your layers on the right side, and similar to programs like Rhino, you could turn on and off layers and features. Using your middle mouse button, you can zoom in and out, and if you hold your middle mouse button, you can pan around. I'm gonna go ahead and delete the cube object here, right click and delete. We don't have to worry about the light and the camera yet. So let's go ahead and install our GIS plugin. Browse for Blender GIS, and this is an open source plugin, and it's on the creator's GitHub. So all you have to do is to I'm going to download the zip file, and add it to my desktop. Let's go to Blender. Go to our edit menu and go to preferences. You select add-on. From add-on, go to the install option here and select the zip file for Blender GIS master that you've already downloaded from the GitHub. Press install add-on and make sure that you check this option 3D view Blender GIS. One last thing, you want to extend this option here. And only thing that we need to set up here is a cache folder for all the files that it will be creating, but also files that we want to be exporting. So then select the location for this folder. For now, I have a folder set up on my desktop called Blender GIS. Then accept, and we are ready to go. So if you close this window, now we should have a GIS option here that will allow us to work with different types of GIS data. Left click on the GIS option, and here we are able to see a few different ways of working with GIS data. You want to go here to Web Geodata, and it breaks down our GIS data into three main layers. Base map, this is the background map, which would allow us to crop different area. OSM layers, and the SRTM, which would allow us to then create topography. From base map, first we will be able to select our location, so left click on base map, and if you look at sources, we'll be able to work with Google, OSM background image, being Esri, or OSM WMS, which will be working with more OSM server information. For now, let's go to Google and press OK. So once you have the base map loaded, now we can select a specific area to focus on. So with your middle mouse button, we can begin to zoom in. However, for more accuracy, you can press G and begin to search for the specific location that you're looking for. So when you press G, here we can look for Miami. And the zoom level, this is something that from experience, I think something like 17 would work well. And press OK. Give it a few minutes to process, and now we are somewhere in downtown Miami. You can begin to pan around. You can use the pan option, begin to pan around. So you can see that the image, the satellite image, is slowly loading. You can also, with your middle mouse button, zoom in and out. So perhaps something like this would be enough for us to demonstrate. Once you have your area selected, and this is basically everything that fits within your window boundary, and do keep in mind that for you to test this for the first time, maybe you want to select a smaller area so you can continue zooming in and out, panning until you have an area that you're happy with. Once you're happy with the area, press E, and that would crop that portion of the map, which would then allow us to further import data from that area. So you can begin to then look at this in 3D. So hold down your middle mouse button and rotate. So now you'll see that this is ultimately a two-dimensional cropped plane with the satellite image integrated. So to go further, we want to first turn this satellite image into a 3D terrain. So we'll go back to our GIS menu here. We'll go back to our geo database, and what we're going to click here is get SRTM. So this is satellite radar mission done by JPL, and if you remember from ELK, this was a source for generating topo maps. So if you click this option and give it a few seconds to process, you will see that here, for instance, here we're starting to see how this became 3D. So keep in mind that Miami is quite flat, but you can start to see that now topo was already integrated with this image. And what's great about this is that this is actually texture mapping, and we should be able to export this into Rhino already. All right. So next step for us is to add other layers here, such as buildings, roads, etc. Do keep in mind that everything that we're generating here comes in as layers, so at any point you can turn it on and off. Let's go back to our GIS and go back to Web Geodata, and here we want to begin to import OSM layers. So click on Get OSM. What you do want to do is to make sure that you have your surface selected. Go to GIS and go to Get OSM, and here we can begin to select different layers that we want to import. If we do everything at once, this could become quite heavy, so I recommend we starting from buildings first. So select buildings. Then you do want to check this option called elevation from object. So this way then your buildings would already be projected onto the surface. And once this process is done, press OK and allow for it to process. Now depending on your computer's capability, but also depending on how much of an area you're selecting, this process could vary. As soon as that's done, you can see that very beautifully your buildings were imported and integrated with the topography. So this is a very, very great way for you to quickly import 3D data. And as you can see, we are starting to see these layers come in. So here, this is our building layer that we can further, if you're interested in Blender, add textures, or there's a few other steps that we can take here, even to add textures to buildings, but that is not the focus of this tutorial. So let's proceed by adding other OSM layers here. I'm going to go back to GIS here, go to Web Geodata, and go back to Get OSM. I do want to start to add other layers. At this point, I don't necessarily have to select the building. What I forgot to do is to have my terrain selected. Go back to GIS, Web Geodata, and click on Get OSM. Let's start with other layers such as highway and land use, and you can start to do this all together. Obviously that would take a little bit longer, or one by one. Then I'm going to press OK and wait for it to process. After processing, you will see that now you have further layers that are added here. So for instance, here we have the land use, we have the natural, and since we are working with polygons that have turned to boundary, if it's within that boundary, just like this information here, it is actually brought in. So this is something that you can do further trimming if you want this to be, let's say, more of a boundary. At this point, we are ready to export this content into Rhino. And start to see how to bring in texture to our Rhino environment. From Blender, you can export to many different 3D formats. And let's go to File, let's go to Export, and for Rhino compatibility, we can work this .obj format. Select .obj, select the folder that you want to save this to. I'm going to save this as miami.obj and press export. You should be able to then, in your folder, have two different files. One is the obj file, so this is the object file. Then when you produce this file, it also creates another file called with the same name but .mtl. So this is the material. And when you're referencing this to Rhino, if you have this in the same folder, Rhino is able to also detect the material and show it to you with that specific texture. So let's go to Rhino, and all we have to do is to go to File, Open, locate your file. So it's only looking at the .obj, but it knows that the MTL file, the material file, is in that folder. Then press Open, and in the settings, there's a few different things that we can change here. I'm gonna convert this to layers, and you want to make sure that you have this option checked, which is Map OBJ-Y to Rhino Z. So in different 3D modeling programs, Y and Z might be swapped depending on whether it's a 3D modeling platform or a game engine. So in game engines, the Y-axis is facing up. So make sure this is checked. I'm going to also split a 32-bit texture. So this is the settings that you want to keep here, and then press OK. Once it's processed, I'm going to go to perspective. You'll see that actually this is the extent of your GIS. If you start to zoom in or select and do ZS or zoom selected, then this is the area that we've imported. So by default, this is in wireframe mode. But if we go to our view types and change this to render, then you're able to see your geometry here. So from this on, you can do further modifications in Rhino. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial.